Welcome everyone to the April session of our SCR Connections webinar series. Thank you so much again for joining us. I am extremely pleased to introduce today's guest speakers. First up, we have Chris Gaspard. She's a librarian at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio Briscoe Library. She has been with the Health Science Center for over 29 years and has worked not only in the library but also in the Department of Family and Community Medicine, as well as being the program administrator in the Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Care Department of Medicine. Chris is currently the head of Liaison Services and serves as the liaison librarian to the School of Medicine and the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences. She assists all UT Health faculty, staff, students, and residents, and has provided search support for many research projects. Chris also provides health information literacy instruction on evidence-based practice and database use both in the classroom and online via LibGuides. She has her undergraduate degree from Texas A&M University and her master's degree in library science with a specialization in health informatics from the University of North Texas. Joining Chris today is Emme Lopez. Emme currently serves as the library liaison to the School of Nursing at UT Health San Antonio. During her 7+ years as an academic librarian at UT Health San Antonio, Vanderbilt University, and UT San Antonio, Emme has published in the American Journal of Infection Control, produced an oral history project in support of the UT Health San Antonio School of Nursing, and assisted countless patrons in finding what they need. Emme values creatively connecting users with the resources they need to move forward with research and achieve success in their projects. This is part of what has driven her to create point-of-need guides, interactive learning modules, and some of the tools that they're going to discuss in today's webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and pass control of the presentation over to Chris and Emme and let them get started. Good morning. Looks like you guys are still muted. Click on that microphone button one more time. There we go.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, Sarah, for that great introduction. We're going to be talking about predatory publishing today, what librarians need to know. Our learning objectives for today are to place predatory publishing in the context of the changing publishing industry, understand why scholars might publish in disreputable journals, note the impact of predatory publishing on science and health, and feel empowered by gaining the tools to make informed decisions.
So good morning, everyone. This is Chris. We're going to start out with a quick overview and provide some context of how predatory publishing is now fitting into the world of our ever-changing publishing industry. So the first thing we want to talk about is, what is scholarly publishing? Well, everybody probably knows what that is. You know, people do research, and we want to make sure those results and their writings and are put into reputable journals, but it all entails about how they're created, how they're evaluated for quality, sometimes this is called peer review, and then how they're shared amongst the scholarly community. And especially important is how they're preserved or archived for future use for other scholars, learners, and the public good. So also within the scholarly publishing realm, you've got now a lot of digital services, a suite of digital services, and you can see them here on the slide. When we start talking about predatory publishing, the two that are normally mentioned the most is open access publishing and those author rights and copyright advising and the importance of understanding what that means. So let's talk a little bit about open access publishing. I think everybody wants to be able to get to what they need quickly and in a way that's freely available. So the original intent of open access publishing was to reduce the cost of publishing and making sure that it is distributed, and being freely available was extremely important. But then because of this, it became dependent upon not on those subscriptions, but on the author. It transferred the ownership to the article processing charge into the author itself. You notice that Creative Commons at the bottom of the slide. This became important because things became freely available. And of course, people want to share that information, but they want to share it appropriately. So understanding about copyright and how to share that information and how to redistribute the information became extremely important. Brief history. Open access publishing isn't that old, but we were so used to, especially in the pre-90s, people who were around in the pre-90s, I know I was, it was a little bit different. Things were subscription-based. Mostly everything was in paper form. They were still in print. Things were not available electronically as much. We began to see a little bit of some predatory publishing practices coming into play. And the big part that hadn't happened yet was that internet publishing hadn't yet proliferated, hadn't become that common. In 1999, NIH, they proposed something that was going to change things. They soon realized that, we've all heard this, things were federally funded, and we needed a place that people could access that information. So they proposed that an archive of free biomed papers be made available. And then in 2000, PubMed Central came into being, that repository, where these things were being held. After that, of course, while these things are being held in a way that are freely available, people soon realized, you know what, I want to do that too. We want other things to be freely available. Biomed Central and PLOS, the Public Library of Science, came into being, and they focused on sharing this information in a way that was of high integrity. They wanted to be sure that if things were going to be out there, that they were peer-reviewed, and they wanted it a way that they were being shared appropriately. At the same time, though, we start seeing something called Wikipedia coming around, and we all know that Wikipedia, we probably all use Wikipedia, but sometimes some of us are still a little leery about what you find in there. So that came out at the same time, and then also what came out was the Directory of Open Access Journals. Because open access journals started to come into the arena, people soon realized there needs to be a way that we know what's good and what's bad. So the Directory of Open Access Journals came about, and this is a group that is membership-based, and they wanted the members to understand that they have to follow principles of transparency, and they wanted to make sure that there were best practices that were happening in the scholarly publishing realm. So that happened between 2000 and 2003. Then we come around in 2008, and suddenly we're seeing, predatory publishers coming around. Not so great journals, not things that are peer-reviewed are coming out. Beall's list came out, and we're not going to talk too much about Beall because as I'm assuming, this may be an assumption on my part, but I think because of us being librarians, we've heard of Beall's list, and if not, we can go a little bit further into that. But just to provide you a little background, he soon realized that these predatory publishers were coming out. He soon realized not all these things are peer-reviewed. So he started a list of things that were not peer-reviewed, and it quickly grew a little bit more from that. But he's actually the one that coined that term of predatory open access publishing. Also during this time, we had in 1999 where NIH had proposed it. Well, now in 2008, NIH mandated that these free to public publishing came about. So that was a big change because at first they were proposed, now they're saying, yes, we need to do this. In 2012, not only do we see the growth of this predatory publishing in 2008, but in 2012, we start seeing a growth of writing about predatory publishing practices. And then in 2016, suddenly there is an FTC injunction against a predatory publishing. So we went from just things being in print to things going on the internet, things starting out okay, then things getting a little crazy, and now we've got an injunction. So we'll talk about that in a little bit later. So, what is predatory publishing? As librarians, we always try to find that information and find a definition. But there's really not a true definition of predatory publishing. Rick Anderson, who many of y'all may be aware of, he's a librarian from University of Utah who's done a lot of information processing on predatory publishing, trying to tell people what it is. And he's saying it's not really, there's not really a definition, but you see it in the practice. He says that it's lacking rigor and it's the deceptive nature of the practice. So it's kind of scholarly publishing, but because of the way it's being done in the practice, that's where you're seeing that predatory piece come into play. Predatory practices, when you start looking at that, many of us are aware of some of these. I'm not going to touch too much on reading on this slide. You can see it, but one of the things that's promised is like you're going to be named to an editorial board, or you're going to have quick publication. It's a good deal, you know, it's low cost for you. You know, it's open access. People are going to be able to access your information quickly. You're going to be published in a legitimate journal. But then you look on the right-hand side and you see the actual practice that happens, and it's not normally what they promise. So definitely predatory publishing is not scholarly communication, it's not furthering that academic conversation, and it's not promoting science and health. So big thing with this, you know, people always get this confused, and I know y'all, many of y'all have talked to people about this, that they think that because it's open access that it's predatory. Well, we know that's not always the case, and that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay, hi everybody, this is Emme. I'm going to be talking about the changing publishing industry. And so we've heard some of the, so how did it all go wrong? This all started out really well, right? Like the NIH had this really good idea where if information was federally funded, studies were federally funded, the information needed to be freely available to the taxpayers who'd funded that work. This is great. Open access seems like a really good thing. And in fact, there are a lot of really great things about open access. You can have, they can be university archives, et cetera. There's so many good things about open access, but how did it all go wrong? It's all about the money. The market changed dramatically, creating an entree for predatory publishers where they could make a lot of money based on a changing market. So these are a couple of graphs that have quite a bit of information in them. What I want to point out to you is this graph on the left-hand side. If you look at about 2002, it runs from 2000 to 2011, so it's a little bit behind the times, but this is the one that I had available. If you look at 2002, there were about 5,000 journals published in online-only journals with article processing charges. So they're online-only, that's where they're published, and the author is paying to publish in them. 9 years later, in 2011, there are nearly 35,000 of those journals that are publishing online only with article processing charges that go to the author. So that's a growth of 30,000 journals in 9 years. That's, I would call that proliferation. Then also, if you look at the graph on the right, this is from the ACRL, and it runs from 1986 to 2011. Again, a bit outdated, but this is the information that's available. You can see that the cost for serials expenditures in ARL libraries over that period of time raised 402%. So libraries were paying 402% more in 2011 than they were paying in 1986 for their journal, their journal collections. And so you have all of this, on the one hand side, you have all of this information freely available in online-only journals. On the other side, you have library collections costs going really, really high. And so it creates sort of a conflict. There's an inherent conflict of interest in the author pays model, because the more a journal publishes, the more the journal makes, because the author is paying to publish. Another piece of this is in the traditional print model, where journals were printed monthly and distributed, there was a pretty high barrier of entry. The internet removed the high barriers to entry that used to be in place with that traditional model. So let's take a look. This is what happens in open access publishing. So these are, I'm not going to walk you through each of these. You can take a look at this slide more closely. But this is not straightforward. It used to be very straightforward. An author would do the research, write the article, send it out to be accepted. If it was accepted, it would be published. The printed journal would go to a library, and then other authors, other scholars would read the work. It was pretty straightforward, straight line. It's not a straight line anymore, and I think you can see here it's no wonder that scholars are confused because this is only a piece. There's still other models. This is just the OA piece. Let's see. So then the other piece of this is that predatory publishing costs real dollars. Chris spoke briefly about the Federal Trade Commission and their injunction in 2016. It was against one specific publisher, Omics Group. And actually just recently, this month, there was a $50.1 million judgment brought at a federal level against Omics Publishing Group. And the way that the FTC was able to bring this injunction was through truth in advertising. So their injunction stated that Omics was advertising peer review but was not delivering, and they were also concealing really high author processing fees, author processing charges, so amongst other allegations. And so that's been a huge breakthrough, and I'm really interested to see how this affects and impacts other publishers who publish with this using the same model. And then also on the right-hand side, you see this article by John Bohannon in Science. And John Bohannon has been an author that's really brought a lot of attention and awareness to the scholarly community, not necessarily in peer-reviewed publications, but through works like these, where he was a journalist for Science magazine for a long time, and he has his PhD in molecular biology. So it's something he's very interested in. Anyway, in 2014, it's estimated that predatory publishers made about $75 million, and that number is only likely to have increased in the last 5 years. So this is a very lucrative industry because a publisher opens up a website, accepts any publication, takes off a processing charge, and then either publishes or sometimes they fail to publish the article. So it's low cost, high reward.
So just because I'm seeing in the chat somebody was talking about Jeffrey Beal. Poor Jeffrey Beal. Yeah, we could go on and on about him, and he has been so maligned. It's awful. I mean, it's not only this $1 million lawsuit, but you see so many other things that this poor man has had to endure from these publishers. It's really bad. He used to have a website, and they took it over, and it's just horrible. But anyway, moving on to why do publishers do this? Why do they go to publish in these disreputable journals? So big thing is, are they aware? Do they just do it, or are they unaware? They just duped by them. So there is an impact on scholars. If you look at that little circle, the pie graph, this is just meant to show you that people have gone, scholars have put their work out there so they could be published, but only 60% of those have actually been published. So, what happens to that other 40% of articles that have been submitted? They're actually lost to that author because they lose their copyright, they lose control of intellectual content, they're spending money that they're not going to get back. This could really hurt their career and their academic reputation. So if you think about it, scholars could be aware. There's sometimes, English is their second language, so there's that language barrier. They misunderstand the process. You saw the one slide we have about, trying to decipher where to go and where to publish. It gets a little confusing to navigate the process. Sometimes they're unaware because, oh my gosh, suddenly I'm being asked. Somebody wants to publish my work, and they're naive about it. So some people are early in their career. Sometimes they think they're publishing in a certain journal, and then they realize, oh, it's just another journal that sounds like it. Jeffrey Beal said in 2017 that the reason I call certain publishers predatory is because they prey on people. They try to trick honest researchers, and sometimes they are successful. But then we've got, on the other hand, some people that they are aware, they need to publish. They're being pressured by their department because they need to publish because of tenure. They want to drive up their metrics. They want to say that they have a highly cited article. They realize that, I can publish, it's low risk, why not? I'll go ahead. Some people want to beef up their CVs. They want to put their name down saying that they're on an editorial board. They want to say they have a lot of presentations or a lot of publications. So Jeffrey Beal says on this hand that, sadly, a few academics are gaming the new system, exploiting the scholarly vanity press to buy prestige. It sounds a little sad, but it happens. So what's the real impact? You know, noting the impact on predatory publishing is evident, and Emme's going to talk to you a little bit about that.
There are, this is Emme, there are several problems with predatory practices. Bad science, it costs money, it costs the researcher money, the impact on scholars, it negates the peer review process. One of the really big things that I want you to take from this is that clinicians cannot make clinical decisions based on articles published in predatory outlets. They just can't. And so they could make really bad decisions if they get the wrong articles. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about these, and when you get the slides, these links are live, so you can go, we're not going to go out to the links now, but you can, and look a little bit more about this. I'd really encourage you to read a little bit more about John Bohannon, who was really a pioneer in getting the word out to the public and the scientific community. But one of the things that John Bohannon did is he created a fictitious study that showed that eating chocolate helps lose weight, and then he published it in a predatory journal. And it was, of course, published with no peer review. It was just published immediately. And then he called a press conference. And his bogus study wound up in Shape magazine, CNN. People believed it because it's quote-unquote science, and so it's out there. And he did all of this and then wrote about it to show how quickly and easily this misinformation can get into the public and really affect people's health and health outcomes. And then we have down here Dr. Olivia Dahl. So there was a retired faculty member, PhD, who put his dog on 7 editorial boards for predatory journals. And if you go and follow this link, one of the images that he sent for the CV to go like on the website was actually Kylie Minogue, if anybody knows the singer. So if you see Kylie Minogue on an editorial board, that may be an indication that you might want to think twice about that journal. And one of the things I want you to understand, and this retired faculty wrote about his experience, there are all these stings. They're called stings, like of predatory publishers, where different people go in and set something up to show what's actually happening. This is to create awareness for us. There is no shame for the predatory publishers. They are money-making operations. They're not worried about their reputations. Okay, so then we're going to talk about journal legitimacy and how predatory publishers kind of glean some journal legitimacy in illegitimate ways. So there's something that's called sound-alike publishing that you need to be aware of, and there's an example here. If you Google the International Journal of Nursing, or the very first, at least in my returns, the very first result was legitimate, Elsevier. The next 2 have exactly the same name, and using the tools that we'll talk about later, I would consider these to be not publishers I would want to work with, journals that I would want to work with. But they're number 2 and number 3. Sometimes if somebody's just looking for a journal and they come up like that, people see this as sort of something saying it's legitimate. Well, it was in my results. It was at the top. And so they think that it's okay. They'll click on it and think it's fine. So you need to be aware of sound-alike publishing. There's also something called hijack publishing, and this is slightly different. It's where a disreputable publisher, like Emme, buys a previously reputable journal and then doesn't do anything. They don't do peer review. They don't continue to have the same rigor and everything. They just kind of coast on the pre-existing reputation of the journal. And there's a great website called Stop Predatory Journals that sort of picked up the work of Jeffrey Beal. They are anonymous. So you'll need to go to the website and make your own decision about how much you want to rely on it. But they host, you can see one of the tabs across the top is their hijacked journals list. And they host a really great list that shows, and you can hover over each link and it'll show you the URL. So you can see the URL for what they would consider the hijacked and what they would consider the authentic journal. It's a very interesting, useful list. Let's see. So let's talk about PubMed and Medline. A lot of my faculty will say that they found something in PubMed so they consider it legitimate. There are predatory publishers, what are considered predatory publishers, that return in the PubMed results list, and we'll talk about why that is. But here, these are to show you sort of where PubMed fits in the National Institute of Health, the National Library of Medicine, NCBI, PubMed, Medline, PMC. I really like the circle on the right that shows PubMed as the whole, and then Medline and PubMed Central are a subset of PubMed. And you can see here that PubMed PubMed Central citations, some of them are in Medline and some of them are not. And so that's a very important distinction. And the reason is PubMed is not a functional whitelist. And the reason that is because of the way it has changed over time. So it used to be really complex to search PubMed. Librarians would have to go for like a 2-week course and learn how to search PubMed. Now PubMed has a really useful, robust, searchable user interface that they have their own algorithm, which actually promotes PubMed Central citations. And so it's no longer a gatekeeper, really, or a credentialing system for Medline. In fact, PubMed through PMC is actually considered it could be considered a publisher. So one of the things that happens is that if an author receives, if a researcher receives federal funding and then publishes in an illegitimate or predatory outlet, that citation can go into PubMed Central and is then searchable in PubMed. So say that I'm a researcher and I accept federal funding, and I do my research, I write about it, and then I go and unwittingly or wittingly, as may happen, publish with a predatory journal. Because my research is funded with federal dollars, I'm automatically going to be able to get my citation into PubMed Central. And in several predatory outlets, you'll see that they offer quick access to citations in PubMed. They're talking about getting that citation into PubMed Central so it's searchable through PubMed. Okay, so then one of the ways that we can see this is we're going to use Omics as such a good example, especially because of the injunction with the FTC. If you go into the NLM catalog and you look up Omics as a publisher, you see a list of some of their journals, and we're going to look specifically at the Journal of Neuroscience and Neuropharmacology. You see here that it says current indexing status, not currently indexed for Medline. So this means that the way that they probably are in the NLM catalog is through the PubMed Central listing. And so what you need to be aware of as librarians and help your faculty be aware of is that not currently indexed for Medline. I don't know many faculty that would really notice that, so we need to be aware of that and promote that understanding.
So now we're just going to talk about how you can become more familiar and what to look for. I've already seen some of y'all talking in the chat about emails and that you've received. And we all have received these email solicitations. So here's an example that I received. Not only researchers, but librarians also receive these too. Now this one is coming from a physical therapy kind of journal, and I wrote with another librarian an article a couple of years ago, and they've somehow picked up on that, and they're telling me, in flowery language, that you should, how am I doing, and we're going to make this article quickly available, and just click here, and you'll have no problem. And normally this is what we see. We see like over-solicitous email, you know, they're like, how are you, happy to, you know, and of course it never makes sense. The sentence structure is usually bad. Sometimes there's not even a signature block. On this one in particular, we invite you to look up that address in Google Maps, and we won't tell you, but it sends you to an interesting place. So just be aware of those addresses and where they're sending you to. The next place that we also see things are in websites. There's so many websites out there now, and we've seen them. They have so many razzle-dazzles. You think they're going to explode on the page for you, you know, because it's like fireworks going off on some of them. Most of the time, their information is very either sparse, or they give you so much information that you can't tell what you're reading, and you probably can't tell what you're reading because the structure is so bad, the sentence structure. Go to the next one, Emme. We've given you a couple of sites here so that you can look at, and we're going to look at the first and the third one. So go ahead and click over. Now this one is coming from the Open Access Library Journal. This one is quite interesting because this is normally what you'll see. You'll see the journal, they'll have that normal kind of look for a journal, sort of normal, but not quite. If you go to the About, you know, they'll kind of give you a little, not too great explanation of their journal, but enough to think like, oh, okay, this is what it's about. This particular one, if you go by the journals and you go by journal by subject, this particular one, Open Access Library Journal, is sitting underneath the Biomedical and Life Sciences group. If you look at the titles of the articles that are popping up, I don't think they really refer to biomedical and life sciences. They're quite different, and you know, like, anyway, the one thing you can tell, make sure that you look at this, and you can normally tell by the scope of the journal. You know, for us as librarians, we know that if we're going to a particular journal, we probably can tell what the scope of the journal is going to be. On these type of journals, it's very, very difficult sometimes to tell what you're looking at. That impact factor, that H whatever index is also there. That impact factor is very vague. They don't tell you what type of impact factor, but they give you a number. And they always like to advertise that number even though they're not telling you exactly what type of impact factor it is. Okay. This next one we bring up because this is actually an omics journal site. The omics, if y'all are wondering, omics, they just named it omics because of at the time when they started, the big thing was genomics and, you know, proteomics and all kinds of omics. So it doesn't stand for anything. It's not an acronym. It's just Omics International. You'll see most of the omics journals in this color scheme, just so that you're kind of aware of them. They kind of come up with this aqua blue and orange kind of look. This one in particular is interesting because the aims and scope, when you look this up, it's just kind of crazy. I can't really read it anymore because it's so small, but it's like, you know, either giving the publisher a stage and things that are going to be quickly published. That also you see that impact factor again, not telling you exactly what that is. That IC value is Index Copernicus. If you go to that Stop Predatory Publishers website, a lot of these metrics are not explained, but they kind of give you a definition of what they're trying to get at and what they stand for. Like that IC, who would know that was Index Copernicus? Also the indexing, when you look at the indexing of these articles, you know, are things indexed in Google or Scribd? I don't think so, but they put all kinds of places that things are indexed for their journals. You know, that ISSN online number, we know that it's kind of easy to get an ISSN number, so that really doesn't mean too much, even though it's there. They put it there because they think that gives their journal a little bit of legitimacy, which it probably doesn't. These conferences, we also get emails for conferences all the time, and we know researchers do all the time. We gave this presentation to some dental faculty once, and we showed this, and we had one faculty member that just started sending us all his emails that he was receiving because he thought we could use them as examples, but hopefully he'll stop soon sending those emails because we don't need any more because we have plenty. but he was getting a lot of them. This one in particular, you notice entomology-2013 versus entomology 2013. If you hover over these, when you get that entomology without the dash is actually an omics international conference. So they're kind of making it easy for somebody to get confused and possibly pick the wrong conference and sign up for it and then pay for it. So people just need to be aware of those sound-alike things. That happens a lot. We mentioned theses converters only because not as librarians are we normally publishing our theses, which some of y'all may be, but a lot of times students, you know, we have PhD students that write a thesis and then they want to publish it. Most of the time, like here at our school, they come in and we can get it bound for them and it can get published and put into ProQuest. But a lot of times people don't have that opportunity, or they get that email that says, we know that you just finished your theses, do you want to publish with us? And there's one company in particular that does this, and Lambert Academic Publishing, just so y'all know a name. And what they're basically are is a print content farm. You'll sometimes hear it called that, or a print on demand, which means that they take the information, they publish it, and it's gone then from the scholar. A lot of times the scholar has to pay, and then they kind of sell it to other places, online buyers, and these online buyers normally assume that these type of things have been proofed or peer-reviewed, edited, and they usually are not. If you look even on Amazon and you look up Lambert Academic Publishing, you'll see them on Amazon where people can purchase them. They normally have the same cover, the front, and the title is different. And basically what they've done is taken the information, bound it, and then now selling it. So that's one of the things, like as librarians, we can inform our faculty and our students about so that they're aware of that. In order to help you with what we just saw, Emme's going to talk about some decision-making tools about those emails, conferences, theses converters.
It can be difficult when there's a lot to feel like you need to be aware of and know. And in the researching of our work on this, Chris and I didn't really find any clear yes-no decision-making tools. We found a lot of lists, we found a lot of suggestions, we found a lot of guidance, but nothing that we could work through that made us feel confident about saying, I would say this is legitimate, I would maybe not publish with this one. And so we created evaluation tools for you to use. The URL is down here, and there's also one for thesis conversion. There are 4 in all. So there's email evaluation, publisher's website, and conference evaluation tool, and then the thesis conversion. I would encourage you to use these and send us feedback. Please send us feedback if you have any, if it worked, if it didn't work, if you have questions. And then, so that's what prompted us to create these tools, is so that we could have something that we could give to our faculty that we could use also to kind of make an informed decision and feel empowered to do it.
The thing with these tools also, they're on Figshare, so we welcome you to use them and to distribute them if you need to, it's fine.
Okay, so then let's talk about white and black lists. Some of you may have subscriptions to Cobble's whitelist or blacklist. Cobble's blacklist was another one that took up some of the work that Jeffrey Beal was doing when his list ended. Those are subscription. Ulrich's, there's points of caution with each of these. Ulrich's, the publisher has to identify whether they're peer-reviewed or not, but if something's in Ulrich's, it's less likely to be predatory. Journal citation reports is really useful. Journal citation reports is you have to have been publishing for 3 years and apply for approval. Some of you may be familiar with the NARS Core Journals list. We talked about Directory of Open Access Journals. Again, there's a lot of research that's been done in different areas, and there are a few what would be considered predatory journals in the DOAJ, but it's less likely. It's not completely false. So it's rigorous, there's a standard, so that can, so if a journal is included in DOAJ, it's less likely to be predatory. Indexed and Medline is a good indicator. Also, there are a lot of disciplines that have kind of caught on to the idea of predatory publishing, and for their discipline, they've worked on a list. So we have like the urology, the PT core journals, inane, which is nursing, and nursing is very active in this. One that's down here with a little X, physical therapy and rehabilitation journals, that is a functional blacklist. I would consider that a blacklist because you click on that and it is a list of all the omics physical therapy and rehabilitation journals. So if you see omics, have in the back of your mind this injunction and think twice, urge your faculty to think twice. I wanted to point out the Committee on Publications Ethics, which is COPE. This is great. It's searchable to non-members, so you don't have to be a member. You can go and you can look up a publisher and see if they're there. And it's publishers that say that they agree that there should be ethics in academic publishing. It's sort of like a Better Business Bureau, but for publishers. So if you have a problem with a publisher, you could actually bring a complaint to COPE against that publisher, and COPE would help mediate it. So if you go to COPE and put in a publisher and they're a member of that committee, they're less likely to be predatory because they're committed to ethics in publication. Okay, and then there are other resources. Hopefully some of you are readers of the Scholarly Kitchen. That's one of my favorite blogs. It's by the, the Scholarly Society for Publishing. There are discussion threads on ResearchGate or in other scholarly and academic discussion groups just to see what's happening, what scholars are talking about, what issues they're confronting. There's the Stop Predatory Journals website, and then there's your healthy skepticism. Always think, is this legitimate? What makes me think it is or it isn't?
If y'all aren't members of the ResearchGate or log, I don't know if it's a member, but if you have a login to ResearchGate, I recently went on there just because I was looking for information about the thesis converters. And there was a long conversation about this predatory publishing, these type of the websites, the thesis converters. People talk about those things, and that's the one thing we've noticed with this particular topic. The conversation among researchers is really high, and you can always, for me, you can always gain information from people who have actually experienced some of these predatory publishing tactics and what has happened to them and why they're not using them. And most of the time, they're really freely giving you that information, like don't do this, and why did I do this, or why I'm not going to do it again. So I invite y'all to go to ResearchGate and follow some of those conversations because they're quite interesting.
Yes, they are. Okay, so we have some time for questions. Sarah, what kinds of questions did we have? Okay, I see this one about ResearchGate and illegal file sharing. Let's address that one. That's something that everybody thinks of. So ResearchGate is sort of like Facebook for researchers. Think of it as sort of a social media platform. Posting a citation or saying that you've done different work, that is fine. Where ResearchGate and authors get into trouble is with the copyright infringement. So if somebody requests that you post your full paper, it's probably not a good idea to do it. You're still beholden to the copyright agreement that you signed with the publisher. So if something's freely available on ResearchGate, then you might want to just double check and see if it's available through one of your database subscriptions, because yes, there is an issue with possible copyright infringement in that platform, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I really don't use ResearchGate for that reason. If I'm looking for an article, what I've gone to it for is basically to follow conversations, to see if anybody has asked a similar question that I may be curious about. That's what I use it more for.
Yeah, it's really interesting to follow this because I think a little bit differently than my faculty, and if I go to ResearchGate and look at different conversation topics, you can kind of get a little window into what they're going through, what they're talking about, what they're thinking, and that stuff is all fine. I wouldn't share or post or accept articles through ResearchGate.
Let's see. So Sarah, do we have any questions? Sarah?
I think you all answered quite a few of them. The one that I did see come in, let's see, someone is asking for a little bit more information about the green open access and gold open access. I know you talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the session, but maybe you can repeat a little bit about the difference between those two.
Sure. So there are different levels of open access, and let's see. Let me go back to the slide really quickly. Green is sort of like your basic open access. There may be like a waiting period before it's freely available. Oh, there it is. And gold is immediately available, and it may have a higher article processing charge. Mm-hmm. And then there's something now called platinum or diamond, where it's completely the repository is completely funded maybe through a grant or through an institution, and it's free for the author to publish there. So that's another one. Does that answer your question?
I think that's great. We do have a couple more questions. One really quick question is that several people have asked if you would mind if they used some of the information and slides that you shared today, if they of course will attribute them to you.
Oh, sure, please. Yeah,
that's fine.
Absolutely. And I see here, are there any potential legal ramifications to referring to a particular publisher as predatory? So I don't know about that, but I am very careful in my language. I never really say, oh, this is a predatory publisher. I say something like, I would be cautious about publishing here. There may be other journals where you might like to publish. I see some red flags that would, you know, when I'm talking to my faculty and things like that, I would not come into a setting like this one and say this publisher is predatory. We used OMIC a lot because of the injunction, so it's pretty safe to say that something is going on there. But I agree, there is a little bit of a caution. You need to help your faculty and help yourself make good decisions, empowered decisions, but Jeffrey Beal is a big cautionary tale for all of us, mm-hmm. And I would I stick to using cautionary language rather than black and white labeling.
Great, thank you so much. We have a couple other great questions coming in. One question about how likely is it to find a predatory journal on a major publisher's site like Springer? There is someone trying to research a journal for one of their physicians. It's not indexed in Medline, but it is in Embase. Is that enough of a reputable source?
Oh, that's a great question, because Springer is typically a pretty reputable publisher, so typically their journals will be reputable. Although we did find weird instances where the publisher was not necessarily reputable, but individual journals would be, but I haven't really found an instance where, with like an Elsevier or a Springer or a Wiley, where an individual journal was what I would consider predatory. Mm-hmm. They may, I mean, some of them are not necessarily as high caliber or whatever. So Medline is very specific in the types of journals that it will index, and so there may be just a reason that it isn't indexed there. If I would maybe use the decision-making tool that we've provided.
The other thing with some of these major publishers is that some people sometimes get confused because on some of the major publisher sites there are open access publications available. Because it's open access, sometimes they get confused, like why are these open access here? And some of it, like on this slide, we see a hybrid journal that some part of it is subscription-based and some of them are open access. You know, Biomed Central, we mentioned earlier in the presentation, that's actually part of Springer Nature. And that is part of Springer, and it is open access, but it doesn't necessarily tie into predatory publishing. We haven't seen that too much as far as the predatory journal. Usually predatory journals sit amongst themselves and create their own company or publisher. Right. You know, they're their own entity. They don't normally associate themselves with another publisher, not that we've seen anyway.
All right, we have one question. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
There's
sorry,
a question specifically about libraries providing a gatekeeping role. Do you know of any libraries that provide that gatekeeping role when faculty authors request article publication charges from their departments or research offices?
I don't, and that's a really good question, because that's certainly a place where the library could offer that type of service. As far as what we do, if individual faculty come to us, we'll walk with them through the process about deciding whether a publisher is reputable, whether they want to work with that journal or not.
Yeah, the one thing, especially with our library, we don't support our authors in that way, with that fee. So that may be a big difference with some libraries that do that compared to those that don't. So the ones that do provide that type of support, that's probably something that, that needs to be looked into a little bit more, to be careful and be cautious of what they're doing. But as far as experience here in our library, only because we don't do that for our authors, we don't provide that financial support, we don't see it. But that is something that would probably be interesting to look into.
Yeah, especially if the institution offers something like that, that would definitely be a place for the library, I would think.
Great, and then jumping off of that, aside from the cautionary advice from librarians in academic settings, do you know if are faculty also devoting time to this with their students? And also, do you see certain subjects where predatory publishing is more prevalent?
We don't see an area, because if you look at some of these predatory publishers, they're covering the gamut. They go from, like that one journal I pointed out to, that whatever it was supposed to be about, they had everything else in there, besides the kitchen sink. So not that we know. We've gone into the classroom and we've talked more to faculty about this issue, and then we sometimes talk to doctoral students who are, in the process of writing theses. So as far as our faculty sharing information, they may be, sometimes if there may be like a preceptor to a particular student, but I don't see it as widespread among the faculty. That's why I think what we're trying to do is going to our faculty committee meetings or curriculum meetings and talking about it to them, just so they become a little bit more aware of it. They're all aware of it, they just don't realize, because all of them get these emails, these it's just like, spam. They get it all the time, get it daily. So they are aware, but I don't know if they're fully aware of the true ramifications of some of these things. So that's what we're trying to inform them a little bit more about.
Yeah, I don't know of any faculty who have dedicated in-class time to talking about predatory publishing.
Yeah, certainly an area that maybe librarians can have an impact. We have another question here. Are you encouraging open access publishing, and also do you advise researchers to include APC money in their grant applications?
So I don't know that it's encouraging or discouraging. Open access publishing is here, and it includes, like, it runs a whole range from an institutionally funded repository to Nature to the predatory publishing outlets. It's just the way that publishing is now, and so I think we have to accept that and be part of it, and that's it. As far as including APCs in the grant funding, I don't know enough about what you can include in grant funding requests, but if it's possible, absolutely, because I think it costs like $10,000 to publish with Nature. So if you want to publish someplace and you know that it's going to be part of it, you have to budget for it.
But that also has to do with the grant they're applying for it. Emme kind of alluded to that. It's that, whatever type of funding you're applying for, you need to know what you can include or not include in it. And that sometimes isn't up to us to decide. It's up, it's already, the decision's been made by what the grant is going to be paying for.
But if you can ask for it, ask for it, because a lot of legitimate journals that charge APCs, the APCs are high. Like maybe what we would consider a predatory journal, they might have like a $350 APC, whereas Nature has like a $10,000 APC. So yeah, I would ask for it if you can.
Great, and we have one more question. I think we'll have this be our last question for today. This is asking about a potential resource, the Journal Author Name Estimator, aka JANE. What do you think about that as a resource to tell researchers to identify what journals and publishers they can submit to?
Well, okay, so we love JANE. It's a great way to go and get ideas. I would not use it as a whitelist. I would look at the ones that you think are good based on JANE and then go to the actual websites and make a decision. But JANE is such a great tool. It's a really, if you are not sure where to start and your faculty needs a place to start, JANE is great. And then just double check and make sure that the ones that JANE suggested are reputable, are good.
All right, well, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for those great questions. And thank you again to both Chris and Emme for this fabulous presentation. We had a huge audience today. Clearly, this is a topic that people are thinking about. So thank you so much for today's presentation.
Oh, you're welcome. We appreciate you having us.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we do have a couple of final housekeeping items before everyone leaves today. So if you could stick around, that would be great.